Dan in Palmer. Is that Alaska?
Yes, sir, it is.
Palmer, Alaska. Palmer, that's a small town out.
In the Matthew Valley area.
Yeah,
Outside.
I think I have a friend who used to live there. Or, anyway, so what's up, Dan?
Well, I got to tell you, it's sort of strange how I came to listen to you. I used to listen to Dennis Miller when I was in the service, and I'd laugh because there was nothing else I could do. And then I started listening to other comedians that did parody, on Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. And then one of my sons said, "Hey, you got to listen to this guy." So I started listening to you. I listen to you regularly every day.
Well, thank you.
And I read your book, the crash of 2016. I had my one son read it, and he gave me a computer chip that had something about Aaron Rusco on it. And my question is about the Federal Reserve System.
Right.
Now, according to this fella, it's a private bank, and we have to borrow money. Why don't we print our own money? Why doesn't our government print our own money? Why are we paying?
We did print our own money up until 1913, and we actually, this was a huge battle from the founding of the Republic. In the very early days, Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists, what became the Democratic Republican Party, did not want the government to be in the money printing business because they were afraid that it was a power that would be abused. And the Federalists and Alexander Hamilton and his bunch and George Washington supported them. They wanted there to be an American bank. So a bank was started, I'm pretty sure during the Washington administration by Hamilton. It might have been during the Adams administration. And it ultimately failed. And then it got rebooted and started again. And as I recall, it was Andrew Jackson who took the thing down. But I could be really, really wrong on my timelines. But Jackson campaigned on he was going to take down the second bank of the United States. And it did fail before the 1840s. And part of the conflict was that we never, from 1789, when we became a republic, when the Constitution was adopted by the states who were operating under the Articles of Confederation, from 1789 until 1933, we had never gone more than 15 years in the history of America without a major national banking crisis. And half the people blamed it on there being a federal bank, and which, by the way, came back into existence, or the Treasury Department started playing that role right after the Civil War with Abe Lincoln with the greenbacks. And that was when we first started issuing, a national paper money. And so half the people said, oh, it's because we've got a federal bank. And the other half of the people said it's because we don't have a federal bank. And so the idea of the Fed was to create a backup system for the banking system and a backup system for the federal government, for money for the federal government, that would be insulated from political influence. In other words, it would address Jefferson's concerns, but it would provide the lubrication for commerce that Hamilton was pushing for. And it was supposed to be the best of both worlds. And in some ways, it has been. In other ways, it hasn't been. And I have some problems with the Fed. The biggest one being that it's only been audited once since 1913. And that was when Bernie Sanders got that audit pushed through in 2008. And we discovered that the Fed had loaned out over $30 trillion. The GDP of the United States is only $15 trillion a year. It loaned out over $30 trillion during the crash of 2008, 2009, 2007, 2008. Some of it to just rich people, to American banks, to American corporations, to foreign banks. It was just mind-boggling what the Fed does. But yes, the Fed is what's called a private-public institution. It was created by an act of Congress, so it's a federally chartered corporation, and it is privately owned by its 10 or 12 member banks, and they are in turn owned by their member banks. I used to, when I lived in Vermont, the bank that I had, the Chattahoochee Bank or something like that, they were a member of the Boston Fed. and which in turn was a member of the Fed. So if I bought stock, in fact, they pitched stock to us when we were living there in Vermont. They were doing a new stock issue, and they said, if you buy our stock, you're essentially buying a piece of the Fed. And so it's, very safe, therefore. So you've got the Fed being private, but on the other hand, the chairman of the Fed is appointed by the President of the United States. So there's, but it's every 10 years. So there's a level of accountability that's not tied to politics, if that makes sense. And hang on just a second, Dan. And then from the 1930s, when the Fed was firmly established, and many would argue that the Fed made the Great Depression worse with tight money policies. From the 1930s until the 1980s, we never had a major national banking panic. And a lot of people attributed that to the Fed. They said, geez, we've gone 40 years without a banking panic, or 50 years, whatever it is, 30 to 80. And it must be that. Well, it turns out, actually, what prevented the banking panics was that the top tax rate was over 50%. And if you look at the history of the United States, you find that whenever the top tax rate on really rich people goes below 50%, you start getting bubble bust, because the money is really easy money for them, so they put it in risky investments and it blows up. Whereas when the top tax rate is above 50%, it's harder to get all that money, and the economy doesn't have all, what Alan Greenspan called froth. So the thing about paying to print the money, when the United States Treasury Department sells bonds, which is basically how we borrow money, but it's an important way for people like you and me, or very rich people for that matter, or even other countries, to invest. They want a safe investment, so they want to buy federal government bonds. And so that when the government sells bonds, the one thing that I think should be changed at law, and this Congress would have to do this, is right now those bonds have to be sold, even though the Fed is selling them, they have to be sold by one of 8 Wall Street banks. And so the banks are guaranteed a profit on all Fed sales, all bond sales. And I think that that's wrong. I think it's stupid. I think we should be able to buy directly from the Fed. So have I brought any light to this issue for you, Dan?
You brought a lot of light to it. I appreciate your work. And, I follow you daily. I do what I can from up here to support what and
good.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you, Dan. Let me just wrap this up. Thank you so much for the call. I do believe that we need a central bank. I do, which is what the Fed is. It's a central bank. You have a central source of currency that's monitoring and making sure that the relationship between the amount of economic activity you have and the amount of currency that's there to be the lubrication for that are in parallel. You get too much currency, you get inflation. You get not enough, you get deflation. Deflation is called depressions. Inflation, we all know what that is. So I think that we need a central bank to do that. My argument is that the central bank should be acquired by the Treasury Department, that we should buy the Fed from the banks that own it, and we should own it, and we should run it. And it should be answerable directly to Congress, which is answerable directly to us. I think that Jefferson's concerns that if there's a federal bank that's, the primary issue of currency, it will run amok. I think those have been fairly well demonstrated not to be the case, because there are numerous countries around the world where their Treasury Department does either own or control, or functionally it runs right out of the Treasury Department, their central bank. So, on the other hand, most of the countries, the Bank of England, the Bank of Germany, they follow our model of it's half private, half public. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And all that said, if you really want to know about this, read Ellen Brown's website, webofdebt, DEBT.com, Web of Debt.